Hi, welcome to Attempted Living. Today, in this video, we're going to talk about listening. In particular, how do you communicate listening? How do you make the other person feel like they're being listened to by you? If you've ever had someone ask you, "Are you listening to me right now?" And you thought to yourself, "Yes, I am definitely listening. I heard everything you just said," then this is the video for you. Because if you communicate listening, then they won't think to check whether or not you're listening because they will know you've been listening. I will share my experiences with listening, my struggles with communicating listening, and what I've done to help me improve in this area. And so let's begin. In the beginning, I was very quiet, and I was very accepting of others. And so when people would talk to me, I was also very shy, so I wouldn't really talk back. As a result, when people noticed that I wasn't answering them, they felt like I was allowing them to express themselves, and they would then tell me a lot of things, and then I would remember the details of what they told me, and then as a result, over time, I would learn about them, and with my knowledge of what they told me, they would feel like I was listening to them and I connected to them. So the first way that I was able to communicate listening was through memory. Essentially, I would remember things about what they said, which basically meant that I must have listened to them say it at some point. And so through memory is a great way to communicate that you listened to what they were saying. This improves relationships because then you will feel closer to the other person because you know more about the other person, and they will feel closer to you because they will feel like you know about them. Furthermore, they will feel close to you because they feel like you accept them for who they are, because now they told you something about them and you know about it and you're still hanging out with them. So you must accept what you've heard about them, otherwise you would have stopped hanging out with them. So helping deepen relationships, if you're looking to do that and feel safe and comfortable with other people, a great way to do this is by remembering what they say, so that you demonstrate listening and therefore deepen the relationship. Then I started, so that was one phase of my life. During the next phase of my life, when I became less shy, I became very curious. And so whenever I would meet someone and they would talk about themselves or about anything, I would ask questions. I would ask like, "Oh, why do you think that way? Oh, when did that happen? Where did that happen? How did that happen? With who did that happen with? What did you think?" Like, I would ask a lot of follow-up questions. And so the second way that I was communicating listening was through questioning. By asking relevant follow-up questions to what the other person is saying, that shows that you've been listening. Because it's very unlikely that you were not listening to them and then you randomly thought of a question that perfectly matched what they just said. That's probably not what happened. What probably happened, if you ask a good question, is you were listening, and then in response to hearing what they said, you had a question. This communicates more than just acceptance and listening. It communicates interest in the other person, desire in what they're saying, making the other person feel attractive. So if you ask a question, you can help the other person feel listened to and valued at the same time. That, again, creates a great positive emotion and energy in the other person, which deepens the relationship, and feels good, makes you feel comfortable and safe with each other, to talk to each other. And so asking questions is a very effective way to demonstrate listening. So first was memory, second was questions. So the third way to communicate listening that I found is fairly effective is to summarize what they just said. So let's say that they talked about going to the bank to withdraw money with their ATM card, and then they saw an extra $20 on the floor, and then they came to meet you, let's say. And let's say that in between that story, they talked a lot about like the color of the air, the color of the sky, like the wind, whatever. There's a lot of details in between. So after they finished telling me this story, I could repeat a brief summary of the story of, oh, that was very interesting and great fortune. You were very lucky today to find $20 on the floor on your way to the ATM, and also you were very fortunate to have this color sky and all these other details happen to you. Like, I would repeat what they said to me back to them to again demonstrate both memory that I was listening and interest that I'm now adding my opinions and my emotions onto their story, so that not only am I demonstrating interest when I add my opinions to their story, but I'm demonstrating togetherness. Because now the story is no longer, oh, you went to the bank and you saw and experienced all these things. It's, I experienced what you experienced through your storytelling to me, and we together experienced going to the bank and having good fortune in a way. Because when I hear this story and I experience the story and I feel the emotions that I feel when I experience the story, then it's kind of as if I was to some degree with you on that trip, which therefore makes you feel less lonely, because now your experience has been tied up with me. And so not only have I communicated listening by remembering what you said, not only have I communicated interest by complimenting on your good fortune and adding my take on your story, but I've also communicated togetherness, connectedness, a relationship, where there's human connection here. So summarizing is an effective way to demonstrate listening, and then leading into follow-up questions. Now the fourth category is a category that you may have heard of from other people, especially if they've done improv. It's the yes and, which is to say that, let's say that my friend talks about a story of going to the bank and finding $20 on the floor, good fortune, and let's say I want to change the topic. Then instead of him or her saying the story and then me starting a new story, I would first say, wow, yeah, and or I would briefly summarize their story. Again, like, there's a section of me acknowledging what they just said, which could be, oh yeah, and, or it could be a brief summary of what they just said, followed by what I'm going to say next. The key is that you have to have this transition, because, for example, if they told me the story, okay, I'm done, and then I found $20 and then I came to meet you. Yeah, so I had pretty good lunch today. So if you abruptly start talking about your story of me having a pretty good lunch today without acknowledging the other person's story of going to the ATM, then it feels like I wasn't even listening to you, because what I'm talking about has zero connection to what you were talking about. So the key is that whenever you're going to change topics, you must introduce a transition so that it would go more like, I found $20 on the floor in front of the ATM, and then I came to meet you. Yeah, wow, that's really great. Today, when I had lunch, then you can, after the transition, you make the other person feel like they were heard, and then you can begin to tell your story. Very key point in communicating listening. This concept that even though you heard everything that the other person said, if you do not express listening in some way, then the other person has no signal to know whether you listened or not, because they can't read your mind. So they don't know if you heard anything that they said unless you communicate to them that you heard them. A good phrase to use is also like, I hear you. And I'm sure there's a lot of other good phrases too. Feel free to leave some in the comments below to help each other with phrases on how to communicate listening. I hope this video was helpful. Another effective way to successfully listen is to notice when you're cutting someone off, because one way to make them feel not listened to is to cut them off before they finished saying everything they wanted to say. So let's say that they say part A of the story, which is that they walk to the ATM. If I were to cut them off and say, oh yeah, I hear you went to the ATM. So about my lunch, then they would feel like you didn't listen to their whole story, because they didn't get to the fun part where they accidentally found the $20 bill on the floor. So you want to be careful about cutting the other person off. And one of the ways that you can prevent accidentally cutting someone off and communicating disinterest, which hurts the relationship, which you don't want to do, if you want to communicate listening and build healthy relationships and be happy with and comfortable with the people you're around. If you want the happiness of good relationships, then one of the ways to listen to make sure that they've said everything they want to say is to pause and pay attention to their body language, to see if they are thinking because they have more to say, or they're thinking because the awkward silence is making them feel uncomfortable and they're struggling to find something to abruptly fill the silence with. If it's the abruptly fill the silence kind of look, then that means you're free to change the subject. If it's the, hold on, there's more to this story, let me try to remember this other detail I wanted to tell you, then you should not talk. So a key part of listening is knowing when to not talk, because you cannot be listening if you're talking. So check for signs through their body language and through pausing to detect whether they have more to say or whether you can jump in and start talking. Okay, so to recap, remembering what they say shows that you listened. That's a good way to communicate that you listened. Asking follow-up questions is a good way to communicate that you were listening and you're interested in them, to communicate that they are valuable, you value what they say. And then the third way is if you summarize things and then add your feelings, opinions, and thoughts to the story that they tell you, that kind of communicates listening and interest and bonding, because you're willing to put yourself in that same life as them. Empathy. And then the fourth way is to know when to not talk so that you can let them talk and therefore allow them to feel that they have been able to communicate everything that they wanted to communicate, so that they feel that you listened to them. Great. Please share your thoughts below. Please subscribe if you like this video. And remember, there are more resources at attemptedliving.com. Thank you.